The afternoon sun in Los Angeles has a particular way of softening the edges of everything it touches. It paints the cracked sidewalks of East LA in a faded gold, wraps the old basketball hoops in a warm glow, and turns even the simplest neighborhood park into something almost cinematic. For David Beckham, that light always carried a dual meaning. It reminded him of how far he had traveled from the manicured pitches of Old Trafford or the manicured gardens of London, and how close he wanted to be to the people who rarely made the headlines. On that day, Beckham wasn't wearing a suit, wasn't hiding behind bodyguards, and certainly wasn't carrying the aura of the global superstar who had once played for Manchester United, Real Madrid, AC Milan, and the LA Galaxy. He had on a plain white t-shirt, faded jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low. He liked being anonymous, or at least as anonymous as David Beckham could ever be. Walking into a community center in East Los Angeles was his way of returning to something purer than fame. A space where kids simply played, where parents leaned on each other to survive, and where sport wasn't a commodity but a lifeline. The community center itself wasn't fancy. It was a squat brick building with a peeling mural of children kicking a soccer ball that had been painted a decade earlier. Inside, the smell of sweat, dust, and cafeteria food mixed together in a way that was oddly comforting. There were squeaks of sneakers against the worn wooden floors of the gym, echoes of basketballs pounding, and laughter spilling from every corner. But Beckham wasn't there for basketball. He had heard this center hosted one of the few after-school soccer programs for underprivileged kids, many of them first-generation immigrants. He pushed open the side door leading to a small asphalt field. The moment he stepped outside, he heard it, a jingling sound. Not the metallic clink of coins or keys, but something rhythmic. He followed it with his eyes until he saw a boy, no older than 11, chasing a ball with small bells stitched inside. The boy's movements were both hesitant and precise, like someone trying to navigate in two worlds at once. He would listen, take 2 careful steps, then tap the ball forward with the side of his foot. The bells chimed softly each time. Beckham leaned against the chain-link fence, captivated. The boy had short-cropped hair, wore a faded green t-shirt 2 sizes too big, and sneakers that had clearly been passed down from someone else. His name, Beckham would later learn, was Ethan. In that moment, all Beckham saw was the boy's sheer determination. Ethan kicked, paused, tilted his head, listened for the bells, and then kicked again. The sound became his map, his eyes, his compass. A group of other kids shouted and laughed nearby, some playing tag, others juggling a soccer ball. None of them were paying much attention to Ethan, though a few occasionally offered words of encouragement. "Go on, Ethan. You got this." But then Ethan misjudged a step. The ball rolled a little too far, the bells faint. He lunged forward, tripped, and fell hard onto the asphalt. The scrape of skin against rough ground made Beckham flinch instinctively. Before he realized what he was doing, he had pushed open the gate and was striding across the field. "You all right, mate?" Beckham asked softly, his voice carrying that unmistakable East London warmth. The boy sat up slowly. His eyes, pale and slightly unfocused, darted in directions that didn't quite line up. Beckham understood instantly, Ethan was blind. The boy grinned sheepishly, brushing dust from his knees. "Yeah, happens all the time," Ethan said, reaching for the ball by listening to the faint jingles. His hand fumbled in the wrong direction. Beckham crouched, picked it up, and placed it gently in the boy's lap. "Here you go," Beckham said. Ethan's fingers wrapped around the ball. He cocked his head. "Wait, you're not one of the coaches. Who are you?" Beckham hesitated. He wasn't used to introducing himself in places like this. Most of the time, people already knew. But with Ethan, he felt a rare freedom. "I'm David," he said simply. Ethan nodded, satisfied. "Nice to meet you, David. You ever play soccer?" Beckham smiled at the innocence of the question. "Yeah, a little bit," he said, suppressing a laugh. "Cool," Ethan replied. He tapped the ball again, listening for the bells. Then he added, almost casually, "You ever try playing just by listening?" The question caught Beckham off guard. He'd played in packed stadiums with 80,000 roaring fans, where communication was through eye contact, gestures, and instinct. But never had he played without sight, relying only on sound. "No, I can't say I have," Beckham admitted. "Is it hard?" "It's different," Ethan said, smiling faintly. "The ball talks to me, you know? The bells are like its voice. But sometimes the world is too noisy and I can't hear it." Beckham felt something stir inside him. An ache, a recognition of the sheer bravery it must take to live like that every day. He reached out, ruffled Ethan's hair, and sat down cross-legged beside him. "Tell me," Beckham said, "how did you get into soccer?" Ethan shrugged. "My dad loved it. He used to play before he got hurt. He said soccer is about feeling, not just seeing. So he got me this ball with bells. Said I could play too. Then he left. It's just me and my mom now. But I still play because it makes me feel close to him. The confession hung in the air like a fragile note. Beckham felt the weight of it settle on his chest. He thought of his own father, the man who had drilled him endlessly in a London park, who had believed in him before anyone else. To imagine losing that connection, it was almost unbearable. Beckham didn't want to make it about himself though. He leaned closer. Your dad sounds like a wise man. He was right, soccer's about more than just seeing. It's about heart. Ethan tilted his head again. You talk like a coach. Beckham laughed softly. Maybe I've been around a few. Just then, a whistle blew from across the field. One of the volunteer coaches, a young woman in her 20s, waved. Hey Ethan. Break time. Ethan stood, ball tucked under his arm. He turned slightly toward Beckham. Wanna come inside? We get orange slices. They're the best. Beckham smiled, rising to his feet. Can't say no to orange slices. As they walked, Ethan's hand brushed Beckham's arm. Without thinking, Beckham offered his forearm, letting the boy hold on. It was such a small gesture, but it carried the intimacy of trust. Inside the community center, the kids gathered around folding tables, munching on orange slices and crackers. Beckham sat beside Ethan, trying to blend in, though a few parents glanced curiously his way, whispering to each other. To them he was familiar, but they couldn't quite believe he was really there. Ethan chewed quietly, then turned toward Beckham again. So, David, if you've played soccer before, maybe you can teach me something? Beckham wiped his hands with a napkin. What do you want to learn? Ethan thought for a moment. How to know where the goal is without seeing it. Sometimes I get close, but I never know if I'm facing the right way. Beckham nodded slowly. He had trained with world-class coaches, studied the geometry of free kicks, perfected the curve of a ball, but this was something entirely new. He felt both humbled and excited. We'll figure it out together, Beckham said firmly. That promise, spoken casually in a humble community center, would mark the beginning of a bond neither of them could have anticipated. For Beckham, it wasn't about being a celebrity, a former player, or an icon. In that moment, he was simply David, the man who had stumbled into a boy's world defined not by sight, but by sound and faith. And for Ethan, it was the first time someone outside his family had sat with him, really listened, and said, we'll figure it out together. The sun dipped lower outside, painting the windows in hues of amber and rose. Beckham glanced at Ethan, who was smiling faintly as he tapped his ball with bells against the floor, listening to its song. Beckham realized he hadn't come here to be recognized, or to inspire anyone. But maybe, just maybe, this boy had something to teach him. Something about resilience. Something about listening. Something about seeing with the heart. And so began a journey that would transform them both, in ways neither could have imagined. The next morning, David woke before the alarm. Los Angeles was still half asleep, palm trees blackened against a pale lavender sky, a garbage truck rumbling somewhere down the block, the distant hiss of the freeway like the ocean trapped in concrete. He put on a pot of coffee and stood at the kitchen counter with a legal pad he brought home from the community center reception desk. On the first line he wrote in block letters, "How does a ballad find a goal?" It was a terrible question and a perfect one. He wasn't a scientist. He wasn't a music therapist. He was a retired footballer with a stubborn streak and a boy's voice still ringing in his ears. How do I know where the goal is without seeing it? David stared at the page until the steam from his mug fogged his thinking and the letters blurred. Then he began to scribble anything that might matter. Sound beacons, rhythm, clapping patterns, left/right cues, breath, crowd noise, phone metronome, drum. By noon he was back at the community center armed with a tote bag that looked like the stash of a dad who had raided a music classroom. A cheap Bluetooth speaker, a plastic hand drum he'd borrowed from a neighbor's kid, a pack of bright orange cones, and 2 cowbells he'd impulse bought at a party supply store because that's what American crowds shook in high school games. He felt ridiculous and excited at once. The field was quieter than the day before. A marine layer had rolled in and the whole place felt cool, the asphalt weeping light. Ethan was there with the volunteer coach from yesterday, the young woman in the ball cap whose name, David learned, was Maya. She was setting out cones with an eye for tidy triangles. Ethan stood with the jingling ball pressed to his hip, listening as if the ground itself were speaking. Maya waved him over. So, David, Ethan told me about you, she said with a grin that knew more than it admitted. He says you play a little. You up for trying something new? Ethan turned his head toward David, expectant. In the soft morning air the boy looked smaller, but his jaw held that familiar stubbornness David recognized from 1,000 dressing rooms. The stubbornness of someone who decided not to give up. "What do you say we build you a goal you can hear?" David said. Ethan's smile tilted, curious. "Like a talking goal?" "Exactly." They walked to the far end where a pair of pop-up goals sagged against the fence. David set one upright, then stepped off the penalty spot with the unconscious precision of a man who had measured distances with his feet for most of his life. He placed the Bluetooth speaker behind the net, synced his phone, and scrolled to a plain tone. Nothing musical, just a steady, friendly pulse. Beep, beep, beep. It sounded like a considerate microwave. Ethan cocked his head. "Sounds like a little robot." "Good," David said. "Today the robot is the back of the net. If you're facing the robot and the bells in your ball sing the way you like, you're on track." Maya clapped. "All right, I'm the left post." She jogged to one side and started tapping the cowbell against the upright. Tink, tink. "And I'll be the right," David said, moving to the opposite post and giving his bell a deeper tonk. Ethan felt the turf with his sneaker, rolled the ball forward, and gave it a cautious tap. The bells murmured. "Where am I?" he called out. 10 yards out, center," David replied. "Robot is straight ahead. Left post has the tiny tink. Right post has the deeper tonk." Maya laughed. "We should trademark that." Ethan drew a breath. He nudged the ball, listening. The robot beeped, the post chimed. He took 2 quick steps and struck. The ball skittered wide, veering toward David's tonk, and clanked off the outside of the post. "Close?" David said, surprised at the rush of adrenaline the near miss gave him. "That sounded like half a hair to the right." "Half a hair," Ethan repeated, mouth twisting. "How big's a hair?" "Smaller than a French fry," Maya said. Ethan giggled, the frustration loosening. "Okay, let's try again." They tried again and again. They moved the beeping speaker higher, then lower. They adjusted the tempo faster, then slower. They discovered that if Maya lifted her cowbell slightly and David held his lower, Ethan could map the space more easily. The high tink and low tonk created a ladder in the air. Within 20 minutes he was hitting the mouth of the goal more often than not. The sound of the ball snapping the nylon, muted, breathy, sent a shiver down David's spine every time. Neighbors began to gather. Dads in work shirts crossing their arms, toddlers clapping, a grandmother with a folding chair offering commentary that could have cut diamonds. A teen in a Dodgers cap filmed on his phone, narrating like a play-by-play man. "Yo, he got it. That's 3 in a row." "Again," Ethan said, panting now, sweat darkening the collar of his t-shirt. "Again, again." On the 4th try his plant foot slid, the ball squirreled off his laces and rolled limp to the side. Without warning, anger flashed in his voice, quick and hot. I can't tell. There's too much noise." Maya stepped forward instinctively, but David lifted a hand. He had seen that spark before, where disappointment meets shame, and he knew the worst thing now would be pity. "Okay," David said quietly. "We tuned the noise." He crouched so his voice came level, not down. "The world's always loud, Ethan. Stadia are earthquakes with seats. Let's make a rhythm that's yours. If you can find your rhythm, you can find the goal even if a marching band marches through the box." Ethan sniffed, wiped his face with the back of his wrist. "What kind of rhythm?" David tapped the hand drum. Dum, 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 dum. He wasn't a drummer, but centuries of terraced chants lived in his bones. He kept it simple, 2 slow beats, 1 quick. This is your runway. When you hear this, you know you're square and steady. When it changes, when the drum goes dum 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 dum, that's the moment to strike. The boy listened. The murmuring crowd leaned in too. Maya's cowbell and David's answered in soft counterpoint, tink, tonk, tink, tonk, while the drum traced the path. Ethan rolled the ball, toe tap, shoulder square, and when the runway changed, dum 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 dum, he swung. The ball hopped, then drove. The bells inside chirped triumph. It kissed the side netting and the robot beep lifted like it had just been surprised. The goal rippled. The tiny stadium of a neighborhood park exhaled. "That's mine," Ethan whispered, as if he'd just found a star with his name on it. "That rhythm is mine." They worked until shadows stretched long across the asphalt and some parent yelled that dinner was getting cold. At the end, David powered down the speaker, gathered the cowbells, and watched Ethan cradle the ball like a small animal he was promising to protect. The boy's mother arrived, hair damp from a late shift, eyes lined with a fatigue that looked older than she was. Ethan pressed the ball into her hands and started to explain everything at once. The robot, the cowbells, the drum runway, the way the net sounded when it took the ball just right. She smiled, bewildered and grateful, then mouthed thank you to David over her son's head. That night, David sat in his car outside his house long after he'd parked. The console clock clicked from 1 minute to the next. He thought about how often he'd relied on diagrams, on whiteboard arrows, on 12 camera angles to decide where to put a ball. And now here was a boy teaching him to build a map from beeps and clinks and breath. He was the one learning the game new. Over the next week, they turned the map into a language. Maya reached out to a friend, Ms. Alvarez, an orientation and mobility specialist who worked with blind runners. She showed them ways to cue left and right without shouting. A short breath through a whistle on a lanyard, a clap that sliced the air with a different weight on each side, a string with knots spaced along it that Ethan could run his fingers across to memorize distances before he moved. You make meaning where there's only sound, she said, her voice soft but precise. Don't talk louder. Talk clearer. David listened like a rookie. He practiced clapping patterns until his palms tingled. He downloaded a metronome app and discovered how the clicks could be felt in bone if the phone rested against your ribs. He hummed a low drone to mark straight, then a higher hum for veer left, playing with vowels the way a coach adjusts cones. It felt half absurd and half holy. 2 sessions later, they tried something new. We're going to pretend the field is a song, David told Ethan as they stood at midfield in the warm slant of late afternoon. Every zone has its melody. When you hear the verse, you're in build-up. When you hear the pre-chorus, you're at the top of the box. When the chorus hits, you hit. Ethan laughed. I like choruses. So does America, Maya said deadpan. We practically live in a chorus. David glanced at her, grateful for the likeness. He'd been thinking about the music America held closest. Gospel that rolls like thunder, country that tells a story plainly, hip-hop that snaps like a flag in the wind. He didn't want to steal anything. He wanted to honor what Ethan already knew. The lullabies his mother sang when sirens chased sleep away, the church songs that swelled out of a storefront 2 blocks over on Sunday mornings, the chants that rose from the bleachers of high school football games under cheap lights. They built Ethan's field song from those pieces. The verse was a warm hum, just a vowel that tasted like summer air. That told him he could carry the ball free. The pre-chorus was clapping, 3 quick, 1 long, that signaled danger, prepare. And the chorus was a simple, strong line David invented the way a dad invents a tune to get a toddler to eat. Go now, Ethan, go now, goal is straight ahead. None of it was polished. All of it made sense to the boy. The first time they stitched it together end to end, the hair on David's arms rose. Ethan took the ball with a stillness that looked like prayer, moved with the verse, squared with the pre-chorus, and when David sang the clumsy chorus he'd been embarrassed to try out loud, Ethan struck and the net shuddered as if the field itself had taken a breath and released it. A handful of older teens who had been shooting hoops on the far court trotted over, drawn by the weird music of it all. Yo, one of them said, pushing his hoodie back. Is that Beckham? David braced for the familiar cascade, the request for selfies, the sudden shift from person to mascot. But the boy didn't take his phone out. He put 2 fingers to his lips and whistled a clean, bright note. The others spread into a rough semicircle and began to clap to the pre-chorus pattern Maya had set. Clap, 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 clarib. The neighborhood became percussion. The teenagers' sneakers tapped the beat. Maya's cowbell answered. David didn't have to sing the chorus now. The whole place did, a rough American chorus made of every accent the city owned. Go now, Ethan, go now, goal is straight ahead. The ball went in. It went in again. It went in so clean the net sounded different, like silk shaken. Again? Ethan shouted, laughing now, all the stiffness burned out of him. Again? By the end of the session his mother was crying quietly behind her sunglasses. He hasn't laughed like this in... I don't remember, she told Maya, and hugged her so tightly the cowbell thunked to the ground and rolled into a crack. News of the strange training method drifted through the neighborhood like the smell of someone grilling. It wasn't the kind of news that jumps to national TV. It was gossip dressed as hope. The famous guy is teaching the blind kid to score with songs. Parents who had no time for anything extra made time to stand at the fence for 10 minutes after work, just to hear the beat. A drummer from a nearby church dropped off a battered cajon and said, "Use it. It has a good chest." A violinist from the Magnet Art School came on a Saturday and played a long, low note that hung over the box like a halo while Ethan lined up a strike. A boy who had thought he hated singing discovered he liked shouting the chorus if Ethan's mum was the one leading it. Not everyone was charmed. One afternoon, a man in a collared shirt with the Community League logo approached with a clipboard. "This is great and all," he said, "but we should be focusing on adaptive drills approved by the organization. Liability is..." David kept his voice gentle. "We'll sign whatever you want." And we're not replacing anything. We're adding what this boy understands best. The man shifted, defensive and brittle. It's unusual. So are free kicks that bend around physics? Maya said from the other side of the goal. Unusual isn't unsafe. It's how people find new paths. The man opened his mouth, then closed it. He watched for another 5 minutes while Ethan found the right door in the music and passed the ball through. He didn't apologize when he left. He didn't need to. The field had already answered him. On a Thursday evening, the sky boiling with sherbet clouds, Ethan asked for something David didn't expect. "Can you sing it like the crowd sings at real games?" The boy said, almost shy. Not the words, just the feeling. David winced, honest. "I'm not much of a singer." "Neither am I," Ethan said as if sharing a secret. "But you sound like a stadium to me." David swallowed the heat in his throat. He nodded. He let the verse be the hush before kickoff, the pre-chorus be the roiling climb of anticipation, and the chorus be a chant too simple to belong to any nation and too universal to belong to no one. He sang with the fearlessness that only comes when it isn't about you. His voice cracked on the second repetition. It didn't matter. Ethan was moving like he could see fireworks. When the session ended, a boy with skateboard scabs on both knees shuffled up and thrust a folded flyer at Maya. "My aunt runs a block party for charity," he said, not quite meeting David's eyes. "They raise money for school supplies and stuff. Maybe, could you guys, do the goal song there? People would throw money at that." Maya looked to David. David looked to Ethan. The boy was running his hands over the net, listening to the faint rasp of rope against palm. "I don't want to be a show," Ethan said, so softly David almost missed it. "You won't be," David answered. "We'll only go if it's for you, and for kids like you. And if you say we go." Ethan's mother touched his shoulder. "You decide." He stood in thought, rocking lightly on his heels. Then he turned toward David's voice. "If we go," he said, "can I teach them the rhythm first? So it's not them watching me. It's us doing it together." David felt the answer settle in his chest like a candle catching. "That's exactly how we'll do it." The days leading up to the block party felt like the week before a derby. They rehearsed not to polish, but to be ready to welcome strangers into the circle. David printed little cards with the clap pattern and the words verse/pre-chorus/chorus in big letters, then laughed at himself and threw the cards away. The point wasn't literacy. The point was heartbeat. Ms. Alvarez volunteered to stand at the left post with her whistle. Maya would hold the right with the cowbell. David would hum the verse and sing the chorus like a man who had forgotten to be embarrassed. And Ethan would be the compass. On the afternoon of the party, the street was blocked with orange barriers and the smell of grilled corn and hot dogs hopped from stall to stall. A church band tuned up on a flatbed truck. A barber set a chair under a shade canopy and gave free back-to-school trims. A muralist chalked a 4-story phoenix up the side of a tan apartment building. People kept arriving. Parents pushing strollers, teens trading cards, an old man in a Dodgers jacket who tipped his cap at everyone like they were all his neighbors even if they'd come from an hour away. When it was their turn, they didn't mount the flatbed. They stayed on the asphalt, at the intersection where the crosswalk's white bands made a makeshift penalty area. "We need the ground," David said. "We need to hear our feet." The MC, a woman with a laugh big enough to anchor a parade, announced them simply, "All right y'all, we got something special. This is about hearing the goal." David stepped to the front, suddenly aware of how rare it still felt to speak into a crowd as David and not as Beckham. He raised a hand no one had paid tickets to see. The hum fell. "This isn't a performance," he said. "It's a map. A map for one boy and maybe for more. The field will be our song. If you can clap, you can help him score." Maya demonstrated the pre-chorus pattern. Ms. Alvarez blew the left-right whistle. 2 tiny pips for left, 1 for right. David hummed the verse and felt dozens of people start humming with him. The street turned into an instrument. "Ready?" he said without the microphone, already knowing he didn't need it. "Ready?" Ethan said, the bells inside his ball quivering like anticipation you could hold. They began. Verse hum, a low river. Ethan moved with it, steps small and sure. Pre-chorus claps, the ladder up. He squared. The whistle nudged him to turn left. The cowbell tugged him a hair right. David let the chorus rise out of him, raw and plain. "Go now, Ethan, go now. Goal is straight ahead." He struck. The ball surging, bells singing, the entire block pulling breath in as one lung. The net, someone's volleyball net they'd strung across plastic posts, caught the shot and billowed like a sail. The cheer that rose up cut clean through the city din and shot down the street, past the taco truck in the shaved ice stand, past the woman selling bracelets, past the muralist's phoenix, and out beyond where any of them could chase it. Ethan stood rooted, stunned, then threw his head back and laughed from somewhere old and golden. David didn't realize he was crying until the boy's mother pressed a tissue into his hand without looking at him, eyes fixed on her son. They ran it again, and again. Not to show off, there was nothing to prove, but because repetition is how a body believes. On the fifth run, a summer breeze shifted and the whistle note skated away on it. Ethan swung too soon and the ball licked the post and shot wide. A small chorus of "ah" rippled from the sidewalk. David wanted to jump in, correct, apologize for the wind as if it were his fault. Ethan beat him to it. "No sorry needed," he called, voice steady. "Keep the runway. I'll meet it." The old man in the Dodgers jacket shouted, "That's baseball talk and football soul." Nobody knew what he meant and everyone did. It took them 3 more tries to get it. When the ball finally went true, a girl on the curb who'd never met Ethan began to cry, then laugh at herself for crying, then clap until her hands must have stung. A police officer working the street closure bit his lips together hard and looked at the stop sign like it had suddenly become fascinating. After the last shot, when the MC announced they'd raised enough in 10 minutes to buy 20 new balls with bells for programs in the district, the crowd began to disperse as crowds do, turning from Miracle back into chores, bedtimes, and tomorrow. David stayed on the asphalt, heart still hammering, watching Ethan run his fingers through the volleyball net as if reading a secret message from the wind. "You did that," David said softly, standing an arm's length away so the compliment would not become a weight. "We did that," Ethan corrected. Then after a beat, "David? Yeah. Can we do it when your team plays? Not at a block party. At a real game. Not in the middle of the field, I know. But somewhere I can hear. You sing the chorus. I'll find the goal inside it." David had faced transfer deadlines with less vertigo. He imagined a corner of a stadium where the world poured itself out. He imagined carving a pocket of calm inside it that wasn't calm at all, just human. He imagined a boy who couldn't see choosing to hear thousands and choosing still to find his own rhythm inside the noise. "We will," he said. "We'll make a place for you. And once we do, it won't just be for you." Ethan nodded, almost imperceptible. "Good. Because the song feels bigger than me." They packed the cones and the cowbells as the sun burned down to a red coin and the muralist's phoenix took on a neon edge. Volunteers rolled the net like a sail and tied it to a lamppost for someone to claim later. The street reopened. The world, loud and ordinary, rushed back in. But David moved through it quieter, as if his bones had learned a new kind of listening. At home that night, he took out the legal pad again. On the first page, under the question he'd written 2 mornings earlier, he wrote an answer that wasn't clever, wasn't a plan, and wasn't a boast. He wrote it the way a person writes a promise they intend to keep. A ballad finds a goal when a city learns the chorus. The request had been small, almost whispered, but it carried the weight of something vast. "Can we do it at a real game?" Ethan's voice still echoed in David's ears days after the block party. It wasn't a demand, it was a dream laid gently in his hands. And dreams, David knew, were fragile things. You couldn't clutch them too tightly or they broke. But you couldn't ignore them either. He spent the following week in meetings, calls, and quiet lobbying. Inter Miami had a match coming up, an MLS fixture, mid-season, not glamorous but still important to fans. David had stepped into the role of club president with a sense of responsibility he had once felt as captain. And now he saw the opportunity not just for marketing, not just for optics, but for humanity. He pitched the idea carefully. A halftime feature, a demonstration, not a spectacle but a story. "This isn't about showing off a disabled kid," he told the skeptical board. "This is about showing the world what football sounds like when it belongs to everyone." There was pushback, concerns about logistics, about liability, about the perception of turning charity into entertainment. But David's conviction was unshakable. He spoke not as a celebrity but as a father, as a man who had seen how a boy's laughter could turn asphalt into a cathedral. He promised the club would cover every safety measure, that nothing would cheapen Ethan's dignity. Eventually, with hesitation but also curiosity, the board agreed. The week before the game, the community center became a hive. Volunteers rehearsed clap patterns. Ms. Alvarez refined the whistle cues until they were crisp as cut glass. Maya drilled the cowbell timing like she was prepping for Carnegie Hall. And Ethan trained like a professional in preseason. He no longer treated the jingling ball as a fragile experiment. He struck it with confidence, mapping space with his ears, building trust in the rhythms they had designed. The verse hum, the pre-chorus claps, the chorus chant, It was no longer an improvised trick. It was a language, and the boy spoke it fluently. Still, fear lurked at the edges. David could feel it in the boy's pauses when he tied his shoes, in the way his smile sometimes faltered when crowds grew too thick. "What if I miss?" Ethan asked one evening after practice, his voice barely louder than the crickets in the grass. David knelt beside him. "Every striker misses. What matters is that you step up and take the shot. The courage is in showing up, not in scoring." Ethan tilted his face upward as if searching the stars. "But what if they laugh?" David swallowed hard. He remembered his own missed penalties, the roar of mockery, the tabloid headlines. "Then we sing louder. And we remind them that football isn't about perfection. It's about belonging." The boy nodded slowly. That night, his mother hugged David at the parking lot. She didn't say much, just pressed her cheek briefly against his shoulder. Gratitude needed no language. The stadium buzzed with its own heartbeat. Vendors shouting, drums rattling, fans waving pink and black scarves. Floodlights turned the pitch into emerald fire. For Ethan, the environment was overwhelming. The chants, the booming speakers, the thousand textures of sound collided like waves. Backstage under the stands, David crouched beside him, steadying his breathing. "Remember," he said, "noise isn't the enemy, it's the ocean. And we built your boat." When halftime came, the announcer's voice rose over the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight Inter Miami is proud to share something special. Football is for everyone, and sometimes the game sings louder than we imagine. Please welcome Ethan." A hush, unexpected, rippled across the stands. From the tunnel, Ethan emerged holding the jingling ball. Maya carried the cowbell. Miss Alvarez adjusted her whistle lanyard. And David, suit jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled, walked with them like a teammate, not a president. They set up a small net at the edge of the penalty area. The crowd leaned forward, curiosity pricking. David raised his hand. "This isn't a show," he said into the mic. "This is a song. Join if you like." He hummed the verse low and steady. Maya struck the cowbell. Tink, tink. Ms. Alvarez blew the whistle. 2 sharp notes, left post marked. The fans chuckled nervously, then began to mimic. At first scattered, then stronger. The entire stadium, 1,000 strong, became percussion. Ethan felt it. He rolled the ball, squared his shoulders. The chorus rose. "Go now, Ethan, go now. Goal is straight ahead." He swung. The ball sang with its inner bells, cut through the night air and slammed into the net. The stadium erupted. It wasn't polite applause, it was the roar of belief. Strangers hugged. Children climbed shoulders. A chant began to ripple. The boy laughed high and free and raised his arms. Tears streamed down his mother's cheeks in the stands. David felt his chest cave in with something bigger than pride. They did it again. And again. The third shot clipped the post and skittered wide. A murmur of disappointment started, until Ethan lifted his hand and called out, clear as a captain, "No sorry needed. Keep the runway." The crowd roared even louder than for the goals. When halftime ended, the players returned to the pitch. But something had shifted. The match itself felt secondary. Fans kept humming the verse under their breath, clapping the pre-chorus pattern between chants. Ethan had woven his rhythm into the DNA of the night. Back in the tunnel, reporters swarmed. Cameras shoved close. David shielded Ethan gently, answering questions with measured words. "Tonight wasn't about football as spectacle," he said. "It was about reminding ourselves what the game is for. Joy, belonging, and the courage to dream." Later, in the quiet of the locker room, Ethan sat on a bench with the ball in his lap, head bowed as though in prayer. "I didn't think it would feel like that," he whispered. "Like what?" David asked. "Like the whole world singing with me." David sat beside him. "That's what football does when it's honest. It turns strangers into a choir." The boy smiled, tired but radiant. "Can we do it again?" David chuckled, rubbing his eyes. "I think the world just asked the same question." That night, clips of the halftime moment flooded social media. Headlines spun. Blind boy scores in Beckham Stadium, crowd becomes his choir. Commentators debated if it was the most moving halftime in MLS history. Schools called asking about jingling balls. Churches wanted to borrow the rhythm. Advocacy groups reached out with possibilities for partnerships. And in the midst of the viral storm, David sat at his kitchen table with the same legal pad. Under his last note, "A ballad finds a goal when a city learns the chorus." He wrote a new line, "And when the stadium sings, the world starts listening." He tapped the pen against the page and exhaled. He wasn't just shaping a boy's dream anymore. He was witnessing the birth of a movement. The days after the halftime miracle unfolded like an unexpected tide. Clips of Ethan's goals, of the crowd clapping in unison, and of David standing at his side spread across the internet with dizzying speed. Morning shows replayed the footage, commentators struggled to describe why thousands of strangers had cried in the stands, and hashtags emerged calling it the night football learned to sing. Parents of blind children wrote letters. Coaches in youth leagues asked if they could copy the system. Advocacy groups sent proposals to collaborate. David, normally used to the frenzy of media cycles, felt something different this time. It wasn't gossip, wasn't scandal, wasn't the usual rise and fall of celebrity. This was a wave of humanity, raw, insistent, asking for more. Ethan, meanwhile, walked through school hallways transformed. Classmates who had once ignored him now wanted to sit at his lunch table, not because he had scored but because he had shown courage. Teachers stopped him to say he had inspired their own children. Yet in the middle of this sudden spotlight, Ethan stayed grounded. He carried the jingling ball to recess, not as a trophy but as a companion, the same way he always had. What had changed wasn't his identity, it was the world's willingness to see it. For David, the question became immediate: how to turn this spark into a flame without letting it burn out. At Inter Miami headquarters, he convened a meeting unlike any the board had seen. Instead of tactical reports or sponsorship charts, he brought Ethan, his mother, Ms. Alvarez, and Maya into the boardroom. They sat under the fluorescent lights while executives in suits shifted awkwardly. Ethan tapped the jingling ball softly under the table, letting its sound punctuate the silence. David began, "We've been given something here. Not a PR stunt, not a one-off halftime, but a chance to build something lasting. I don't want a memory. I want a movement." They called it the Choir Project. The vision was deceptively simple: create programs where blind and visually impaired kids could play football guided by sound, supported by community rhythms. Inter Miami would provide seed funding. Local schools would pilot the training. Volunteers from the stadium crowd offered to teach clapping cues and whistle codes. Even a percussion ensemble from Little Havana signed on to design rhythmic drills. David insisted the program not be branded with his name. This wasn't about Beckham the star, it was about Ethan and kids like him. The first official session happened on a Saturday morning. The pitch was smaller than a stadium, just a borrowed field in East Los Angeles, but the energy was enormous. 10 children arrived, each holding a white cane or guided by a parent's hand. They wore different jerseys, some Brazil, some Argentina, some Inter Miami, but their nervousness was the same. When Ethan stepped forward, ball in hand, they straightened. He wasn't a star, but he was proof. He demonstrated the runway rhythm. Whistle left, clap right, hum straight. He showed how the jingling ball carried the map of the pitch. And when he scored into the net with his friends cheering, the other kids clapped not out of obligation but because they understood they could follow. Reporters showed up again, this time in greater numbers. Yet David was careful. He spoke softly about inclusion, about resilience, about the joy of participation. He refused to let it become pity porn. "These kids don't need charity," he told a CNN anchor. "They need opportunity. And the rest of us need to listen to the way they play because they're teaching us something bigger than football." The anchor pressed, "What's bigger than football?" David smiled, his voice low. "Belonging." Months passed and the Choir Project grew. Stadiums across the country began inviting visually impaired children to halftime demonstrations, not as spectacles but as proof of potential. Schools integrated rhythmic drills into physical education. An MLS Foundation pledged grants to expand jingling ball production. Even abroad, messages arrived from Spain, Brazil, Japan, coaches asking for manuals, families sending thanks. Ethan found himself speaking at conferences, shy but steady, explaining how sound was not a substitute for vision but its own kind of guidance. One evening, David sat in his backyard with his wife and watched the footage of a game in Chicago where a blind girl named Sophia scored using the choir system. The crowd there had erupted just as Miami's had months earlier. He felt a lump rise in his throat. This wasn't just Ethan anymore. This was multiplying, resonating, echoing in places he would never touch. He looked at his wife and whispered, "This is why I said yes when they asked me to take this job. This right here." The culmination came at the end of the season. Inter Miami hosted a festival instead of a traditional match day. The pitch was divided into stations. One for rhythm drills, one for adapted games, one for storytelling. Hundreds of families attended, bringing children with and without disabilities. At the center stage, Ethan stood with a microphone, voice trembling but clear. "When I first played with sounds, I thought it was just for me," he said. "But then I realized it was for everyone. because when we listen together, we all find the goal. The crowd applauded. David, standing behind him, felt tears prick his eyes. That night, after the festival ended and the stadium lights dimmed, David walked alone on the pitch. He carried the legal pad he had been scribbling in since the beginning. He read the lines to himself. A ballad finds a goal when a city learns the chorus. And when the stadium sings, the world starts listening. He added one final note at the bottom. And when a boy teaches us to hear, the game becomes something eternal. He closed the pad, exhaled, and looked around the empty stands. He imagined the echoes of claps, the laughter of children, the hum that had turned concrete into choir. And in that silence, he realized the movement no longer needed him to push it. It was alive, independent, carried by voices far stronger than his own. He smiled, whispered a thank you into the dark, and walked off the pitch knowing the story would keep singing long after the lights went out.